evening and welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings the events of the day with a constitutional perspective. And myself, James Barrett, and Mark Malachowski are here to present for you. Mark, what do we have tonight?
Well, first we're starting with the VA problem. There's problems with the Veterans Administration and treatment of veterans.
Okay, we're talking about the scandal that's graced the headlines now for about a month and a half, 2 months.
Well, phony scandal. Yeah.
Oh, it's a phony scandal.
Phony scandal,
okay.
yeah.
Well, let's pretend, let's address the phony scandal. The scandal does involve, there's a wide, it's interesting because it involves so many different aspects. We have all these veterans coming back from 2 wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, plus we have all the veterans that served in prior wars. And now I understand the Veterans Administration has been playing some games on how they schedule appointments to be treated or to have examinations.
Well, I tried to get a guest on the show from the Veterans Administration, someone who worked there, but apparently I think what the big issue is here is there's a pervasive culture of fear.
Are we talking about the whistleblower overtones for coming on and then being persecuted because you did say something?
Well, in this big of an operation, right, where now 40 veterans apparently have died because they were on these secret waiting lists and because there was quotas, and maybe more. They're coming up with more and more problems. And we don't even know, tens of thousands, 60,000, 100,000, who knows exactly how many people have been delayed and delayed. But anyway, it's a huge thing. But the mid-level bureaucrats were forced to fake these reports. They didn't want to, but they were afraid not to.
Wait a minute, Mark. You've just brought up a couple of different things I want to get clear for our viewers. Number one, when you talk about fake lists or hidden lists, what are you actually referring to?
Well, a lot of these lists were destroyed.
Destroyed by who?
Destroyed by whoever the conspirators were. Now, there was someone who came out and was a whistleblower and said, hey, look, these things are missing. They've been, this is what happened. But yeah, as far as obstruction of justice, they made lists so they can meet their quotas. Now, let's explain. There's 2 basic theories on this. One is it's Bush's fault. So apparently all this happened under Bush's control and it just came to light now.
Oh, 5 years after the...
14 years later, they thawed out the bodies or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that's one theory, is it's all Bush's fault.
Oh, okay.
And on the other theory is like, well, wait a minute. The Veterans Commission got more money than ever. They had plenty of money, but they are in this culture of fear. And the other theory is this culture of fear is kind of, well, if you go back to Paul Krugman, right? In 2006, he said the VA is a triumph of socialist medicine, right? And that's the future. It's a triumph.
Well, wait a minute. Let's. Are we talking about kind of aligning this with the same idea, the Affordable Care Act?
Exactly.
Okay, so the Veterans Administration is like the
single payer.
It's a single payer system, and it's also the VA system is the largest number of hospitals in the country that are all affiliated. So if this is like a precursor, what's going to happen when the population has the Affordable Care Act turn into a single payer system?
Well, what's interesting about this is they had quotas, and they said, hey, look, if people only wait so long, right, then you've met your quota and you're rewarded for quotas. Now, when we're looking at quotas, we go back to, and I would encourage people to go, look this up on their, website. It's called a Holodomor, right? The Holodomor. Now, that was a Soviet land management scheme where they collectivize things. So it's collectivization. So basically what we're talking about is we're taking the medical care in this country, we have collectivized it, right? And if you look in the past of what happens with collectivization, if you look back to 1933 under Stalin, you collectivize all the farms, and in the breadbasket of Europe, the grain capital of Europe, which is Ukraine, the best land you could possibly grow wheat in, they put in quotas and said you have to produce this much grain, and that's how it shall be. In fact, this capitalism, this free market thing, everything was confiscated, the land was confiscated, livestock was confiscated, and the government did everything by quotas. And what was the result of that?
Well, we know it was all a failure. It was turned into the Soviet Union, and at that point it became a basic monetary failure because there's no way you can run an empire on quotas. And this is interesting.
Well, what happened in that particular case, production fell by 70%. 7 million people starved to death.
There's your failure.
Well, it wasn't a failure for the government, though. The government goal was not to feed people, and it wasn't to make money. The government goal was to have complete control over the populace. Right?
Well, wait a minute. Now you're giving an analogy that's like the Veterans Administration.
Exactly.
Because they have such control over the doling out the medical treatments for our veterans.
They have a death list, and if you're If you're loyal, you don't go on the death list. If you're disloyal, or you might be disloyal,
Or you talk too much.
or you talk too much, then they had it back there. They had a thing called the kulaks, right? And the kulaks were like rich peasants who had land, who could hire people. These people were sent to Siberia, where most of them, like a third of them, froze to death, and everything was confiscated. And 7 million people starved to death. And so that was a big success for socialized farming, because they didn't really care about so much about, okay, we have more farm products. In fact, what happened is the people got less and less. The government procurements went up and up.
Well, of course, then you start developing the levels of government that are above the masses, and
Right.
those people are all making the money, and everyone below that are not. So
Well,
you
it's
actually
a
don't
big-
have a middle class. You have a separation. You have the
Well, you have the
ultra
elite.
poor, the top,
Yeah.
and the bottom.
And
There's
so
nothing in between.
So what they called this at this point was decolonization. What I would call what's going on now with Obama's collectivization of the medical system and putting people on death lists, rewarding people who are loyal, and leaving the people that aren't loyal to die. I would call that decapitalization.
I got a question. Is this anywhere in the book by Sal Linsky? Is this another one of the tenets of the empire of fear that we have running our country right
And
now?
so what happened here is they had the quotas, and you had a certain grain production, and if you didn't meet what they thought you could meet, when they were completely wildly unrealistic quotas, right? You can never meet them. The troops cordoned off those areas. You didn't get any food into them, and they took away their seed for next year's crops. Those were confiscated, and then that was a massive
Well, wait
famine.
a minute. So if we start using the seed as analogy for health care, if you're taking away the health care, but you're promising that you're doing something, you're in fact regulating it so heavily that very few people can actually use the healthcare
Well, the
system
thing is,
to be able to get healed.
The government has complete discretion of who gets care and who doesn't. And that is a political weapon. We've got 40 people who are now dead, right?
Mhm.
And when they talked about this dekulakization, they said that the liquidation of the kulaks is a class. So what they were looking at is liquidation, right? In other words, these people by government edict are eliminated.
But wait a minute. Are you trying to say that same theory is being put into the healthcare system for the veterans, and because of that, even though there's been far more money poured into the Veterans Administration, there's been more money in the last 5 years poured into the Veteran Administration than has been in the prior 20, that even with that coming in, this excess of money, that they're cutting the health care back for the veterans that need it the most?
Well, what it's doing, it's a symbolic. It shows that the government is in complete control now, and they can have a death list, and they can do whatever they want. And if you talk about it, then this culture of
You go
fear.
on the death list.
You go on the death. Well, you'd lose your pension. You'd be discredited. You get
Okay,
hounded by the
well, this
IRS.
is the
You're hounded by the FBI.
Yeah, well, this is the whistleblower
The weight of the central government crushes you.
Yeah, well, this is the whistleblower that I'm talking about, because I know that this is one of the largest whistleblower cases that's just come up. And it's interesting, the newspapers and the typical media is not really hitting the whistleblower.
Well, the media is the Ministry of Truth.
Yeah, of course, it's a spokes group for the administration. But the problem is, whistleblower is a statute that says that if you report something that's a danger to the general community and you're retaliated against, you win automatically. It's a black and white kind of law. It's a statutory crime. You say,
that was in the olden days.
no, it's in the modern days, and I'll tell you why. A lot of people thought whistleblower statutes were hard to prove, but in this,
so Eric Holt will run in and prosecute all these whistleblower
I don't know
statutes.
about Eric Holder. I think we're going to have to wait for another administration for that. But I do believe the whistleblower statute. In fact, Dodd-Frank brought up whistleblower. But you know what? Why don't we leave this, because I think what we have to do is see how it plays out a little bit.